All right, guys, Mr. Slyway here. Here comes part 2 of our Antebellum reforms lesson. There'll be 3 parts. This is part 2. Again, hopefully you guys are getting all your work done on Google Classroom. Make sure you're answering the questions and whatnot. We'll try to have a Google Meet next week. Maybe 2 of them, but definitely at least 1. Okay, so if you've got any questions, we can get going through that, all right? When we're done with this unit, we're going to have a little kind of a project instead of a test. So, again, keep paying attention and hopefully things go well. So, last class, we talked about the first couple of issues, right? We talked about religion and we talked about alcoholism. Today, we're going to break into the next 2 big issues, which are public education and women during this time period, okay? So, let's start with public education. In 1800, there's really no public education throughout the United States, and it's honestly really sketchy. There's all these pay for classes situations with kind of private schools, I guess you would say, but there's no training for the teachers. In all honesty, anyone could open up a school. So there was no regulation on what was being done there. There were no rules about what was being done there. There were no rules about what was being taught in those schools. In fact, only two states had mandatory requirements for going to school, and that was Massachusetts and Vermont. Other than that, schools were honestly really sketchy. There were all different ages of kids in the schools. You could have a 3-year-old, a 4-year-old, a 5-year-old, 6-year-old in a class with a 10, 11, 12-year-old. And they would all be taught the same thing. So it's not like things were, separated for different age groups or different people. People were just thrown in. Their parents would pay the schoolmaster or the teacher, and the kids would be taught. Now, it was not a good thing. Most kids dropped out or quit by the age of 10. They worked for their parents. They went working somewhere to get jobs. So education during this time period is not good, all right? And a bunch of our political leaders didn't have much education during this time period either. So, things are not going too well, okay? So these people called education reformers decide that something's got to be done about this. And they want to establish public schools throughout the whole country to give at least every kid a chance to have some sort of education, to learn something, all right? So one of the main ones is Horace Mann. Horace Mann decides to start teacher training classes. He figures that the people in charge should have some sort of knowledge of what they're doing, some sort of idea of what they're doing. And he figures that the schools should have some sort of curriculum or some sort of standards, right? They should be teaching certain things to certain kids at certain ages instead of just throwing everyone in there together and talking about whatever they want to talk about. So Horace Mann kind of leads the push for this in having some sort of guidelines. And Massachusetts becomes kind of the trigger point for all this, or the main point for all this, where things really start to happen and public schools really get going with guidelines and some sort of structure. So by 1850, roughly every state in the country has a public school or a public school system. Now, it doesn't mean they're equal by any means. We're going to talk a little bit more about that. The South particularly does not have good schools, right? Most of the kids go to work directly on the farms. Most of the kids are going to work directly in fields. They're working for their parents. They're working at home. They're not going to school. And the schools out west are really rough as well. Out west has not really been kind of, I don't want to say civilized, but built up all that much at this point. So the schools out there are not very good as well. So mainly these schools that are doing well are in the Northeast. All right. It's a good start. It's obviously not a perfect system, and it's something that, they're gonna build towards as we get closer and closer to the Civil War. The next of our kind of antebellum issues going on is the beginning of, if you will, women's rights. This is going to be the first time period where women really start to speak out against their role in American society. Okay? Part of what's going on during this time period is what's called a cult of domesticity. It's this idea that a woman's job is to be in the house. It's her job to cook meals, to provide for her husband and her families, to get pregnant and have children. to not leave the house, to keep things clean, to make sure that, food is ready for her husband when he gets home. She doesn't really have any rights. Even married women don't really have any rights. They have no property. The property is owned by their husband as soon as they get married. It cannot be theirs. They have no right to get divorced. Their husband can divorce them. But in order for a woman to get divorced, she has to get permission from her husband. So, women don't even if they're married, don't even have rights. They don't really even have rights to their children if they're married. They become property of the husband. Women in general don't really have that many rights. They can't vote, obviously. We'll get into that later on at this point. They can't run for political office, so they have no way to change the situation that they're in. They're just kind of stuck in this situation, which is pretty terrible, and they can't sue. So if something horrible is done to them, they have to hope that their husband will sue on their behalf. If not, they're just out of luck. They can't go to court. They can't sue to try and make things fair. So women really don't have many rights at all at this point. And in 1848, a woman named Elizabeth Cady Stanton, that's Elizabeth Cady Stanton, is going to attempt to change all of this. She becomes one of the first women's rights kind of activists. And she's going to head up what is called the Seneca Falls Convention. All right, that's going to be in Seneca Falls, New York. She believes that they should basically come up with a set of standards that promote equality for men and women. Okay, she believes that things should be set up so that women have an equal chance to do things as men. And it wasn't just women who attended this Seneca Falls Convention. There were also a lot of wealthy men that attended, but not enough individuals attended that kind of had that much pull in the government or that much interest in changing things. So the Seneca Falls Convention and Elizabeth Cady Stanton, they're really important, but they really kind of fail to gain that much traction. So women don't get the benefit of that many kind of improved rights situations during this time period. They try, and the importance is that women really try. They begin this process. All right, this process will continue on all the way into American history too, into the 1900s, of women attempting to get a higher standard of living, more rights, and more traction in U.S. Government and business. Women just want equality, and at this point, they don't really have it. All right. So next lesson, we will be talking about kind of the divide between the North and the South that's growing, and about slavery and how that's going to really tip off a lot of things heading into the Civil War. Okay. So again, make sure you are doing your Google Classroom assignments. If you know people who aren't doing them, make sure that they get on there. I'm going to be emailing students and parents pretty soon, trying to make sure that people are on there doing their work. And again, we will have a Google Meet coming up pretty soon, okay? So keep an eye on Google Classroom. The info for that will be put on there, all right? If you've got any questions, as usual, email me, message me over Google Classroom. I respond pretty darn quickly. Again, you're all doing a pretty good job, those of you who have been logging on, and stay safe, okay? See you later.